Today's guest is Samuel Rivera. He is a original filmmaker. So he shoots his own content for a lot of his films, and then he also creates compilations, and they truly are masterpieces. The way he's able to, blend music, video, and then an overarching concept is really impressive. So, you know, I came across his videos a while back through actually Joe Rogan. He had been kind of resharing a lot of Sam's work, and one of the most recent, I would say, notable videos that went viral was this video called Freedom, and just remembering what makes this country so great, and really being aware of like the different things that are at play, and just it really struck a chord with me, and obviously struck a chord with millions and millions of other folks. But Sam is really a testament to believing in what you do, loving what you do, and staying the course. He's been consistently putting out content for years and years, right? So you have these viral spikes with certain videos when you get nods from different people. He's worked with UFC fighters, he's worked with a lot of big names, but what really was impressive to me was the consistency of output of what he does, and how passionate he is about his craft on a day-to-day basis. So we get into a lot of really heavy and deep stuff, so be prepared. It's a really like engaging, riveting episode, if I do say so myself. Not because of me, mainly obviously because of him, but we get into he went through a tough divorce, and so talking about how that really shaped him, how he was able to use that, and kind of flip it on its head and turn it into a positive in his relationship now. And then we also get into some politics, so please, be respectful of everyone's opinion. Please don't come cancel us, and please, or if you're going to cancel someone, come for us, don't come for Sam. He's a really nice guy. So I hope that you can see that I'm sure you will, in the conversation. And without further ado, please enjoy Samuel's story.
Bradley, what's up, man?
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Do you prefer Bradley or Brad?
It's funny that you asked that. Definitely Bradley. I recently have kind of made the switch, actually, from Brad to Bradley. It's a big moment in my life, big professional advancement. I was joking with my girlfriend about it. I'm like, you know what? I think I'm ready to be full name Bradley now. So
That's funny. What was the decision factor in that?
well, I just to be honest, lately, Brad's and Karen's have been getting a bit of a bad rap. So, the stigma behind it was a little bit of a contributing factor. But really, I've always liked Bradley. But I guess as a kid, it may have been, I don't know what it was. I just had a bad, feeling. But like my guy friends would be like, "Oh, Bradley," it's like kind of more girly or whatever. But I always personally liked it, and so I'm bringing it back. And so it's funny.
Yeah, that's kind of funny because I've always like never liked my name, right? Samuel.
Yep.
Like the only person that calls me by my full name is one person that somebody that doesn't know me, and two, my mother.
Right.
So it's everybody else is just like, "What's up, dude? What's up, bro?" or Sam. But you know what I
Yep.
mean?
That's funny.
So
Yeah. It's and I've noticed lately that a lot of people, for whatever reason, I started probably like signing my signature Bradley, and changed like some of my like messaging that was going out to Bradley. And I've realized like the past 6 months, just more and more people ask me right up front, which I prefer. So it's just, I don't know, the universe is conspiring with me. So
yeah, I've learned to ask because more recently, since I don't want to say I've gotten any kind of like fame. I'm not saying that by any stretch of imagination, but as I've let's just say as I've met new people more recently, they've asked me like, do you prefer Sam or Samuel? And I just thought, hey, that's kind of a nice thing to ask if somebody,
right,
prefers one over the other. So
right.
for me, I personally don't care what people call me, but it's just, for me, I just know, like, if you're calling me Samuel, it's because we don't really know each other. It's just, you've seen my
Right.
name online or something.
Exactly. All right. Well, I'm gonna go by Sam now because we've got the rapport going
we've
already. So
we've got the established relationship here.
exactly. But I did think it was interesting before we start, and I'll give you a formal intro and everything. I thought it was super another kind of serendipitous thing when I was watching some of your videos and also just looking at your page. I saw a lot regarding storytelling, and you actually using the phrase, I'm here to tell your story. I'm here as a storyteller. We all have these stories to tell. And I just thought it was fitting. The podcast name is literally a story to tell, and the whole background of it is, I found myself talking to a wide variety of people and realizing just all of the different paths that people are on, all of the regardless of what industry you're in or what background you have, we all have that story to tell. And I think for me, it's been super beneficial getting to talk with folks and learning about their, their past and how they were able to overcome different adversities. And then it's also interesting to see, while there's so many differences, there's also a lot of common threads and common themes that continue to come up. So, whether you're talking to someone from Australia or New York or wherever it might be, there's a lot of like the human nature aspect of it is super similar. So I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah. So what's the, naturally I want to like interview the other person, right? So
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I'm probably gonna be shooting like a lot of questions to you.
yeah.
What was like the biggest, or what has been the biggest lesson for you since you started the podcast and finding all these, as you say, commonalities? What's the one or two things that's been the key takeaways for you?
That's a great question. So this will be the third season. So there's been two seasons, a dozen guests on each season. So,
Nice.
yeah. So I would say one thing that has struck me is that, you know, regardless if the people have reached, like, to your point, some level of fame, or they're doing X, Y, and Z at a level in their industry that's, pretty like profound, or if they're just getting started, I would say one thing is that th I always had this um, thought when I was growing up that, like, the people that are doing it at the highest level, they were on that path, built for it. There's like a blueprint, and they're just following that blueprint. And I'm realizing as I get older and older that, you dig back to the inception of these people's stories, and it's like they're just normal people that decided they were going to do it. So it's not like they were blessed with the specific, they may have some talent, but it comes down to like plotting your own course and taking action.
That's so true, man. Yeah, and it's funny you say that because I thought the same way as well. Like, I don't know how old you are. I'm 40, and growing up, it's not like you're, how old are you?
28.
28. Okay. So growing up, like, so you grew up in an era when there was really no, I mean, you always had internet, but it's not as like dominant in our lives as it is today, right? Like when you
Right.
were, when you were a kid. Um, and it's just funny because like now you could see it, right? You can kind of see somebody build and go through this like evolution. But when we were growing up, you see these celebrities, like you said, and you're like, wow, they just either got lucky or somehow got selected to become this person. But it's like, no, man, like it took a lot of work to get to that point.
Right.
You're right.
Yeah, and to your point, it's funny. My buddies and I, my peers, we always talk about how we kind of our generation did hit that like technology at almost like, for what I feel like was a happy medium, because it's like we did receive technology and cell phones. Like my first cell phones, like, freshman year of high school, and that's kind of when it was like flip phones, that type of thing. And so it's like we were introduced to it, but it was at a stage where it's like you'd like to think you were kind of like mature enough to a degree, and it wasn't like completely overtaking your life, or like inhibiting you from going out and playing outside, that type of thing. Um,
Right.
and the other thing that I did notice, to go back to your question, the other thing I've noticed is the value in momentum, or like incremental steps. So, when people do have these big things that happen that either, you know, tear them down, or vice versa, when they have this big milestone achievement, I'm a big like reverse engineering kind of person. Like, okay, let's backtrack and see what actually led them to this big moment. And it's just all these incremental gains. It's not one specific effort. It's not 1 week of this. It's like, no, this, to your point, it's like, no, they grinded this out for years and years sometimes. So those are the two things that, it's more accessible than you may, at least me previously may have believed. Kind of like the notion of you can do it too. And then the value in building momentum, I guess.
Yeah. No, 100% on all of that. In my life, I've had a, fair share of grinding it out and having to have momentum, behind you. And I've always found that whenever, I start a project, whether it's in my filmmaking or my physical fitness life, I always found that whenever you stop that momentum, it's always harder to, sort of jump back in, regain that momentum. So it's
Right.
super easy. Like, I don't want to say it's super easy, but once, if you're riding on that wave of momentum, it's a lot easier to just continuously put one step in front of, another. It's harder if you fall down to get back up, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting you bring up like the physical aspects, because I think that is also something that I've noticed as a trend, both personally and with folks that I talk to. When they have, it makes sense, right? When you're taking care of your body, things tend to follow off of that. You feel better, you start making better health and nutrition decisions, and it's that momentum aspect of it. But yeah, I'd love to backtrack and hear when you mentioned physical fitness. I kind of thought back to, I was doing some research, and it looks like you started in, as far as filming, doing kind of some jujitsu. That was kind of like you're doing some different trainers and coaches. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So we can dive into that, or I can kind of dive into, what led me, to that.
That'd be
And yeah. So, being that you mentioned the physical fitness stuff, there was a time in my life where I was going through a divorce. I had to move back in with my parents. I was completely broke. I took on a lot of the debt during the divorce. And really, I had like not a nickel to my name. It was like, I wasn't sure if I could even buy a pie of pizza at the end of the week, and I was also 280 pounds, right? So, right now I walk around at, about 175. And the reason I bring that up is because it was through the journey of trying to lose the weight, of going through this physical transformation, that I was able to really learn a lot about myself. And it taught me the lesson um, that if you put in the hard work, something that we talked about, before the show, if you put in the hard work, you can achieve the things that you set out for. And at the end of my transformation, my physical transformation, I said, what else? How far can I take this? What else can I do? And it really led me onto a journey of um, becoming physically fit, but then also mentally fit as well, right? I started to read books, and I became sort of obsessed with this idea of, how do I make myself better? How can I make myself a better human being, not only mentally but physically, and then of course financially. And then years later, after I went through that transformation, I started doing jujitsu. And within about I want to say about 3 years or 4 years, something like that, of doing jujitsu, I decided to just to kind of pick up a camera and interview my jujitsu coach. He was doing a promotion, and I thought it'd be interesting to do something for the school where we interview him, his mindset, and why he what his thoughts are on jujitsu. And in that interview, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the connections that the sport has with everyday life. Like one of the examples that he gave me was, if you're typically getting armbarred in while you're rolling or in a match, if you're constantly getting armbarred by somebody, it's not what they're doing, it's what you're doing wrong. And if you and it's the same thing in life. If you're constantly getting into an argument with somebody, or people off the street or your friends, and you're constantly having a problem with people, odds are it's not them, it's typically you. Right. And after I finished editing that interview, I'm like, shit, man, he's 100% right. And I started interviewing another coach, and I learned a lot of valuable lessons from that. And I just kept on that journey until one of the coaches actually said to me, "Hey, Sam, I love the video you did. And I was just doing this as a hobby." And he goes, "I'd love to pay you to do some of my, some of the coaches that work for me." And I said, "Shit, man, like, wow, like I never even imagined that somebody would be willing to pay me for my hobby." It's like if you had a hobby collecting toys or building models, and somebody all of a sudden said, "I'd love to commission you." It's like, I do this because I love it. I'll do the videos for free. Yeah. And that's when I just said, shit, like I actually can maybe do something with this.
I was going to say that must have been a big moment right there, having that realization, like, okay, well, now let's turn it up a little bit and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, and it took a long time. Like this was I want to say the end of 2015. And I would get like little jobs here and there. I was working a 9 to 5 still in like a corporate office, working in logistics. So something that had nothing to do with my hobby. I just kind of the hobby really started, like I always had like a little fascination with cameras. I would take pictures of like my family and do like little videos and just like kind of have fun. Nothing like sure. Formal. I was actually editing these things on like Windows Movie Maker. It was just like the absolute worst software you can use on the face of the earth. And and then I started doing the jiu-jitsu videos, and then again it was just always something that I loved, and eventually somebody decided to to pay me for it, which is again, like you said, a moment when we're like, oh shit, like you can actually do something with this.
Right. So it's interesting to hear that, especially I mean, there's a lot to dive into, which I'm taking notes. We'll touch on a lot of different points, but just like the recency bias, because you just said that about the Windows media movie maker. It's funny because there's so many examples of that happening where in my own life and peers, you just kind of use what you have and you get thrifty and you figure out a way to make it happen. And I think that is like the true testament to obviously your ambition and drive, and to the point of the fact that you love it. Like you were going to make it happen regardless of what it took. And at the time it was probably like, this is what we have. You probably weren't even aware of the different levels of what's the next type of software that you can use in Adobe Suite or whatever it is. And I think that's a true testament that comes up in a lot of different situations. And there's some people that would kind of throw in the towel and say, well, this is hard to use. This thing's a pain in the ass. Like we're not going to make it. But when you find a way, it's interesting. So I'd love to dive in also to you were talking a little bit, depending on how comfortable you are with getting into like some of the adversity you were talking about. You were talking about in debt and going through a divorce. Obviously, those are two pretty like hot button issues. If you're willing to dive into it, I'd love to kind of hear how you're able to battle through those things and come out the other side of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. Sure, ask away whatever questions you'd like. And I'm an open book, and I feel like it's important that people share these lessons and share their stories, because I remember when I was going through the divorce, I felt so isolated, and I said, man, like nobody else in the world could possibly be going through something like this. And my situation was unique because or maybe not, I don't know. But, for me at the time, and it still today, sort of felt unique. Like, she, the reason we got a divorce was because she started, she started cheating, and then she ended up getting pregnant with one of the guys. And it was just like, pretty much I was living like a Jerry Springer, show. And it was just a complete disaster. But anyway, as I was saying, like, I went through, as I was going through that, I remember I was driving in my car one day after work, and I said, man, like, I can't believe that somebody, I felt so isolated, and I felt like nobody else had gone through the type of situation that I did. Um, and I remember like having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he had said to me, he goes, don't ever feel like, you're ever going through, like, you're alone in this process. Like, you're not the only one, and you will get through this. And for me, it was so comforting to hear that, because I'm like, shit, here I am. I'm thinking like I'm never going to get through this. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. And to hear somebody say like, you can get through this and you're not alone. It's like, it was reassuring for me, and it really helped me. So the reason I'm an open book is because, whoever's listening to the show, if you're going through anything like this, just know that no matter how bad the situation may seem, you will get through this. And I often say to my friends, like, life, will throw curveballs at you, and it happens for you, not to you. Right. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that the things that happen in our life happen for a reason. And I've always found that whatever adversity I've gone through in my life has always been to my benefit. It's always helped me out at the end. I became a better person as a result of it.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. And like you said, I would say that's a really good friend. That's a loyal friend who helped you there, because there's lots of times where you can feel alone, and like, no one in the world kind of understands the predicament you're in and that type of thing. And I love that happens for you, not to you. That's very, I don't know if you're familiar with like stoicism or anything, but very stoic philosophy there, like kind of controlling what you can, and seeing life for the whole journey that it is, rather than allowing it to like blow up your whole existence. So I really like that. Super strong. I'm interested how, like, maybe the tangible steps that you started to take. It sounds like the gym was a big thing, like the physical fitness. So was that something that happened immediately, whereas like, immediately post divorce was you started honing in on the fitness?
I want to say, not right away. I want to say I started honing in on the fitness. So I moved back in with my parents. They let me move back in. And I want to say within like 2 to 3 months, I started the physical fitness journey. At the time, I really didn't know like the basics of like, what are the foods you should be eating? How much of this should you be eating? How do I work out? What muscle groups and what's a plan? And, I didn't know anything. This is, let me take you back. Like, I was a guy that went through like the McDonald's drive-through. I'm not even exaggerating. The McDonald's drive-through was like my lunch and my dinner, right? I would drink Coke, Coca-Cola cans like all day long. I barely even consumed water, like my beverage was like soda and coffee was pretty much it. I remember like on a Sunday night, I would go to like, there was a Kmart not far from me, and I would go to the Kmart. I would pick up like a 12 pack of soda, and I would leave it at my desk so that I could drink it throughout the day. And then at lunch, I would go get the big thing at McDonald's, and get like 2 or 3 refills from that. And then the same thing for dinner. So I was consuming, God knows how much sugar, throughout the day. So to, go back, like, how did I start? I came across at the time, there was, and the website's still around, it's called bodybuilding.com. And they put out these workout programs. And there was this guy that was just on their, one of their coaches, or one of their staff members. His name is Chris Geffen. He started this like 12-week transformation series. And I discovered it, I want to say when he was already like 4 weeks 4 weeks through the program. So like every day he would post a new video, you would follow along. He would show you what to eat, how to measure your food, the whole thing from,
Right.
you know, from beginning to end. And that literally gave me a blueprint. And it was a matter of just like following that program. And what was nice is like he was also giving you like life advice on the days off. So it was like, you know, I really needed that mentorship. You know, I grew up with my dad, but he wasn't really like you know, like a somebody I went to for like life advice. So I grew up throughout my life like not really having that like, you know, father figure or somebody in my life where I can go to for advice. And so, you know, when I started this program, like on the days off where you weren't training, he would give you like little life lessons. And for me, that was like super important. And that, you know, that kind of helped me with like the physical and the mental side. And then when that program was finally over, I think I had lost like maybe like 50 or 60 pounds in that 12-week course. And then I just, you know, I took it from there. You know, I just started picking up books, like self-help books, like Tony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within. And I just started reading as much as I could about, you know, about how to improve myself. So those were kind of the first steps that I took. And like I said, it was about 3 months because I looked at it like this. I said, you know, there's only so much money I can make, right? To pay down this debt. So, but the one thing that I can do is improve myself. I can right now, today, start taking action steps to improve the person I am and become 1% better than I was yesterday. And it's really as simple as that. And it's riding that momentum, just continuously trying to make yourself better than you were yesterday.
Absolutely. I love that. I love the 1% gains. There's a book, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Atomic Habits, where it talks about like kind of the incremental benefits of, you know, consistent habits, and similar to what you're talking about though, like, you know, it's just the steady compounding effect basically.
Yeah.
And
It's funny because it's I haven't read the book, but it's in my Amazon cart to read. So
oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely a good one. It was funny when you're talking about the 12-week program. My next kind of question, I find when I do like a certain thing, like if I'm training for a specific event or I'm training for you know, I'll do these different challenges just with myself to keep things kind of fresh and keep it interesting. When I get to the end, that's when it's like you're at like a breaking point, right? You're either like, okay, now I can kind of coast for a bit because like look at all the hard work I did, or it's like, okay, to your point, what's next? Or I think you said yes, something along those lines, like, oh, okay, now what's next? Like, how do we take it to the next stage? And I'm interested to see or hear if you kind of create your own personal your own physical goals now, or your own training plan, or if you readopt, you know, a similar one, or kind of what your training goals look like these days, now that you kind of have that background.
Yeah. So pretty much I work out every day. Right.
Yep.
So, and working out every day doesn't mean that I'm going through like this crazy, you know, CrossFit workout. So pretty much it's very simple right now because I'm not working on any kind of like transformation. You know, at the moment, I actually had finished one in May, and so right now I'm just kind of maintaining.
Sure.
So right now it's pretty much walking every single day for 30 minutes a day. And then I weight train anywhere between 3 and 4 days a week. So it's pretty simple. So I'm working out for like an hour and a half a day. And the days where I'm not weight training, it's only like 30 minutes a day, or, you know, 30 minutes.
Definitely. Yeah.
I do want to say that, you know, when I was going through that transformation, I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, you know, you had mentioned, you know, at the end of a goal, you look at it and you're like, okay, what's next? But looking back, though, that first transformation was probably the happiest time of my life. Going through that journey was like, looking back, I was probably at my most happiest because I was controlling my environment, right? The guy, Chris Gatton, always says that, right? He says, control your environment. Don't let your environment control you. And it's so true. If you apply that logic to anything in your life, like, you can become a better person from it. And yeah, I just wanted to say, like, that journey, and like I learned so much about myself and what I'm capable of. So I think in any journey, and I'm sure, like, because even in my career now, like I look at it and I'm like, man, I can't wait till I get to this level. And that's true. But at the same time, I know that when I get to a certain level, I'm going to look back at these days now, because I'm just beginning this career, and I'm going to look back. I'm like, man, those were the days, right? It's like, you got to really enjoy the process. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned in the process.
Yeah. It's funny. Wow. You just said that it's super profound, because I'm going to quote something that wouldn't seem like it would be profound, but I don't know if you're a fan of The Office, but there's a quote in The Office with Andy, and he's like, I wish there was a way to know you were in the good old days while you're actually still in them. And
I
like,
like that.
that just always was like, wow, because you do get nostalgic for specific times that you're like, wow, I wish I had noticed all the beauty around me at that stage in my life, during the college years, or during, growing up playing football in the, backyard, those type of things. And so when you just said, it's important to take heed, take stock of like, okay, I'm here, and I'm pretty darn happy. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I never watched The Office, but I love that quote, man. I'm gonna have to find out what episode that was said in.
Yeah, I actually, I think I have a video that it's from, so I'll send it to you after the show for sure.
Yeah, that'd be great, man.
Show notes. And I would highly recommend The Office too, if you ever have some time to throw that on. That's a good one. You mentioned we're kind of bouncing all around. That's how good.
Sorry, man. Yeah, I have a tendency of doing that too. It's like,
that's me. No, that's me. I have certainly a free flowing like conversation environment here, but sometimes we go off on tangents. But I think that's the beauty of conversation. It's kind of like jazz, kind of just like, there's an end destination, but we'll figure out how we get there, bouncing around.
For sure.
You mentioned that books were a big part. You got into reading, and you mentioned the Tony Robbins, like kind of the personal development books. What are you reading these days?
It's funny that you mentioned Stoicism, and that's kind of where I wish I would have discovered these books, where I would have discovered Stoicism years ago. I could have probably really used it, but I only recently came across it, I want to say like 2 or 3 years ago. So that's kind of what I'm reading right now. I just finished reading Ryan Holiday's book, Obstacle is the Way. I'm reading the Daily Reader, or the Daily Stoic. It's like, I don't know if you have that book or not, but it's like, so the next book I actually ordered it. I'm waiting for it to come to mail, is Ego is the Enemy. So for me, like, all that, that mindset has really been beneficial to me, because I feel like it's taken me outside of like, I guess, thinking that the whole world is centered around me, and realizing that, like, there's a lot of lessons in there, right? Like, to love your fate, and there's just there's a long laundry list of lessons,
Sure.
in these words. And but yeah, that's kind of what I've been into recently, just like the whole Stoicism, philosophy.
Yeah, the Daily Stoic, my dad actually has that book, because he'll occasionally just send me a screenshot of a specific passage, and it's like, I'm assuming it's like 1 page per day, because it usually just has like, or one.
It's a great book, man. It's hold on. So behind me is where I read every day, and like, just to kind of give you an idea of like, the lessons that I've learned from, and these are just like my favorite ones. There's stuff in here that I don't even have flagged off, like here. And what's it say here? It says, recall the last time you said a really boneheaded thing, something that that you can, what does it say? Something that can that make you, makes you want to bite down and say like, what the hell did you say? Chances are you didn't need to, but you thought doing so would make you look smart or cool or part of the group. And it's so true. Like we can, reading that, it's like, makes you think like, man, there's been, I probably said a bunch of bonehead stuff here on this podcast. And it's like,
no, absolutely not.
But yeah, it's a great book, man. I'd follow in your dad's footsteps and highly recommend picking it up because it's such an easy read. Like it's literally like a short paragraph, little life lesson for the day, and something, you can just, go on with your life. You don't have to read like, 70 pages a day to, to get through the book. It's an easy read.
Right. Yeah, I'm interested. I definitely will grab that. I'll have to steal it from him when I go home this weekend. So I'll grab it from him. But yeah, I know Ryan Holiday's a big one right now too. Ego is the enemy is him as well, right?
Yeah, he's got like a whole series. I think it's Obstacles Away, Ego's the Enemy. Just came out with a new one, is Courage is the Way or something like that. So those have been like my recent reads. I'm also reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I'm only like 30 pages in, but it's pretty powerful. Like some of the stories that he's talked about in there.
Yeah. So I listened to that during kind of like the peak COVID days when we were locked down over here in Boston pretty heavily. But I actually got turned on to his stuff through Jordan Peterson, who I know you did a video on. But yeah, he always referenced him in like all of his talks, and I was like, okay, I gotta check this out. Like you said, pretty like heavy, sometimes dark material, but super insightful. Makes you kind of confront some things that usually you might, or me personally, that I just like, you don't like to kind of, you sometimes suppress because it's too heavy, but it's it's certainly like a necessary read. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things the biggest thing I've taken away from it so far is when he was talking about, being in the concentration camps and how many of them, obviously died. And what he talked about was like some of the people in the camps, the prisoners, were sometimes worse than the soldiers. Right. And he said, I often think back that many of us that died were the best of us. And I'm like, man, like that's pretty dark to, to say that, right? Like, shit, the best of us died. It's crazy.
It's
good book though.
Well, it just reminded me, again, not to go too far down the rabbit hole of books, but I'm reading right now Atlas Shrugged. Have you ever read that? Ayn Rand. No. Super interesting. It's basically like a cautionary tale against socialism or communism, but it's set in the US back in like the 50s and 60s, but basically talks about what happens, without giving away kind of the punchline, what happens when these producers or creators, whether it be musicians, filmmakers, big business people, but anyways, the doers of society, what happens when they're no longer incentivized? What happens when they start disappearing because they're not following the status quo? And so, what happens to the world when there's no more producers? And it's like some uncanny, there's a lot kind of related now with like cancel culture and all that type of stuff. So it's a little bit of a, she was a little bit of ahead of her time. But it's super interesting. She's like a Russian immigrant, so she saw, Soviet Union firsthand. It's, really profound stuff. Pretty also, heavy read. But if you're into Viktor Frankl, I'm sure you might like this.
Yeah, I have to. If you wouldn't mind sending me a link to the book or just the name of the book, and I'll check it out.
I definitely will.
No, I agree, man. Like, I guess, the doers, a lot of them bring inspiration to the world. And without that, it's like, could be a pretty dark place if there's no inspiration or motivation to be found.
Right. I actually was just watching before we got on the call, which was provided a good like hype up video. I had watched it once before, but your recent Reagan video was just super strong, and I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that. One, I'd love to hear your specific process of how you put together, how you gather these clips and how you put them in this montage. And then I'd also love to hear, about that specific message and why it spoke to you. Specifically, just obviously it, but for the listeners, it's talking about that we got into this situation, in part because of big government, not thanks to big government in a way. So relying on yourself and your own kind of personal ambitions, and to our point, you can have a big impact on your community and the world around you with your actions, and rather than relying on some like external force that's really not, I mean, not to get too political, but the government at its core isn't really creating too much, in my opinion. We might have to cut this out so we don't get canceled.
Yeah. Well, Reagan says, I guess the biggest takeaway from that speech, it's from his inauguration speech. And he says that we often look for government to provide solutions, but government really is the problem to the situation that we're in. And for me, it was kind of interesting for two reasons. That speech was spoken in 1981, which was also the same year that I was born. And what he was saying, I felt like really said a lot about what the things are that we're going through today, in our society and in this country, really, and globally. And I just felt like there was a need to turn that into something that's, that was visually compelling. A lot of times, you ask me like, what's my process with like creating these videos? I never go out and actively search for something to turn into a video. A lot of times what happens is it presents itself, and I'm inspired by what the person is saying. And I'm like, man, I've got to take this to the next level and put some visuals. So that's kind of always been my criteria. I never really like I said, I never really actively go out and search for something.
Sure.
And then as far as like finding the visuals, a lot of my videos, I try to find like metaphors. And I mean, there's a whole process, right? It's like finding the right music, right? Like this is the very high level things, like finding the right music that matches the tone to what the person is saying and how they're speaking. And then finding the visuals that connect to what the person is saying. And for example, like my Joe Rogan Freedom video, right, he says, people aren't paying attention to certain things. And like, I found a quick clip where there was a guy texting behind while he was driving. And it's like, everybody understands. Yeah. So it's like, it's this quick clip. And I like to add those, like those little things. And you just mentioned, you saw the Jordan Peterson thing. He says that, you could put yourself in a whole, I forget the exact words that he says, but you could put yourself in a predicament. And the visual that I chose to use for that was, you saw the scene starts off with like a snake, and then a mouse gets thrown into the into the snake's tank. And right, it's like, you could really fuck yourself, right? And that, like, right, if you see that and you hear what Jordan Peterson is saying, like, you immediately get it. So that's kind of my process. Like, I always try to find things that connect, not just like, in a cliche way, but also has a meaning within the visual itself.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, you definitely do an amazing job of that. It's certainly compelling, engaging, but also accessible, which I really like. So it's not overwhelmingly, it's not, a lot of them aren't overwhelmingly long. They're, able to be, get the point across, get the messaging pretty quickly, which for my generation, obviously we have like kind of, shorter attention span. I think overwhelmingly like people are starting to have shorter attention spans, but specifically like the younger generation. So I certainly felt that connection pretty quickly. And your point about adding in, it's like those little subtle nods and references that really bring the whole thing together, because it's clear when I'm watching them that every single clip is intentionally placed, because they're actually, because it's a shorter video, there's really no time for fluff, which makes it such a hard hitting video. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like a song that's just like every line is a punchline. That's what it felt like to me when I'm watching. I'm like, whoo, I need to watch it again, because I definitely I need to, like, I definitely missed some of this because I was just like caught up on the last line. It's like just all, there's like I don't know if you know the band Sum 41, but it's like all killer, no filler is the name of their album. That's what I was thinking when I was watching. I'm like, boom, like hits. So I
Yeah.
really like it.
That's the idea, man. Like, and I appreciate you, noticing, picking up on those things. You're right. There's no time for fluff. And I always, well, I guess there's two things I wanted to say. Is my style very much mimics like what a movie trailer is like, right? I've always been, growing up, I always was fascinated with like, with movies, like, as far back as I can remember. I remember, my parents, like, which is kind of crazy thinking back, like, they had the Terminator, the first one, on like VHS, and I remember watching it probably like a million times. And and I just always was like part of like, as I got older and I would be able to go to like the movie theaters, on my own. I remember like my favorite part was always like, going to see the trailers of the next movies that are coming out. And like, so I kind of, fell in love with that. And then when I started creating videos, slowly but surely, I started like mimicking that style, not intentionally, but like anybody that's seen my stuff, it's very movie trailer-ish. So
Interesting. Yeah, and it definitely has your own, you definitely have created your own style as well. Like certainly, I know what you're saying with the movie trailer type of vibe, but I think that there's like more depth. Maybe it's because of the messaging that you're choosing or the types of things that you're talking about, and just the attention to detail. But it's, you've certainly developed your own style. So I applaud you for that. I always like when
thanks.
people have like a specific aesthetic, but then make each video personalized off of that aesthetic. So, great job on that.
I'd like to take back, or not take back, but just go back to something you had said before, that we as a society have a shorter attention span. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
I think that because a lot of times when I talk to clients, right, they're like, Sam, how long should we make this video? And my response is always, as long as it needs to be. And what that means is, if you've got an interesting story, right, people will watch it, right? How many times do you watch a movie that's 3 hours long? I bet you if they made a fantastic Star Wars movie that was 5 hours, I mean, they sort of did that, right, with the Mandalorian, right? Like it's basically a 10-hour movie. You'll watch it as long as the story's great. And for me, whenever I'm making a video for my personal brand, or I'm making something for a client, the number one thing that I always focus on is making sure that, one, there's no fluff, and that story is the biggest driver. And if you try to put too much shit in there and try to over fluff it, like that's where people tune out. So I don't think that we have, and sure, yeah, maybe we have a shorter attention span because there's just so much content to out there and so much for you to consume. But if you've got an interesting story to tell, people are going to watch it. Just be mindful of how much fluff you have in that story.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think we obviously are inundated with all these different options as consumers, but to your point, if it's engaging, that's always going to grab us back. Almost maybe even more so now. You're kind of making me have this realization as we talk it out, but maybe even more so now because there is so much noise. It's like if you have something that does cut through that noise and that's so vividly profound, we're certainly going to tune in. I mean, and to kind of transition, the other I guess interesting thing is like you look at podcasts are blowing up right now, and podcasts, you look at someone like Rogan, 4 or 5 hours, at least 3 hour conversations. So that right there kind of like contradicts the whole, because people my age, we and all throughout the demographics listen to his stuff. So I think that's true because he does a great job of having compelling guests on. They have a conversation that's just, you never know where it's going to go, but it's always pretty interesting.
Yeah, for the most part, it is. I've been listening to Rogan since, I want to say since he was like, I mean, shit, he was still doing this, off the laptop. I remember tuning in that early. So I think he started the podcast in 2011 and, or maybe even earlier than that. I want to say maybe 2010. Could be wrong, but it was around that time frame. But yeah, back to your point, like he's, he challenges that idea that shorter content is better, and that's not necessarily the case. As long as you've got an interest, you're not just trying to fill an empty space. People are gonna tune in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's an interesting character because I think it's super important to have a voice like him right now who's willing to have conversations with anybody. He's not like plucking specifically from one side of the political aisle or one like genre of person. He's like open, to your point of being an open book. He's willing to talk about anything with anybody, and he also will give it back to people too if he disagrees. He'll call people out on their bullshit basically, and as a listener that's super refreshing because sometimes you'll be hearing it like, oh yeah, like here they go, and then he'll say what you're thinking, like, well, hold on, like you just said, if someone contradicts themselves, he's like, hold on, you can't say that because you just said this. And it's like, okay, he's not just going, he's a real down to earth dude that just is having a conversation like how you would with your buddy. And that's what
100%. And it's not he's not trying to do it in a malicious way, and he's also he's just naturally a curious guy, I think. And unlike other platforms where, like, let's say, I don't know, I was going on to like, Good Morning America, whatever. Like, I'm going to go in there with an agenda. The person interviewing me understands what that agenda is, and they're not going to really challenge me for the most part.
Sure.
I know what those questions are going to be in advance, so I can kind of prep for it with my PR. It's like, whereas like Joe's going on the show and he's going to ask the questions that he wants to ask. And I think that's, the best way of having that type of show. And if it was any other way, I don't think he would have as much of a following.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I hope that's okay too. It just reminded me, I used to send like 10 questions the first season to guests to give them like a general idea. And then I was realizing, I'm like, we only did like 2 of those questions because it just ends up being a conversation. So I hope that's okay that we're going in a little blind, flying blind, but I hope that's fine.
Yeah, no, that was cool, man. It was funny is that I send, but all right. So I do videos beyond just like the Rogan or Jordan Peterson, Reagan.
Sure.
I also have like original content where like I interview somebody, typically somebody I know or I know of them. And but I'll always send them questions because I'm also trying to navigate that story through my brand as well, right? I like you, I want to know how somebody overcame adversity, what obstacles did they go through, and what is the life lessons that I can extract from that. And I want to be able to always provide value when somebody's watching one of my videos. So for me, I guess depending on the format, like I'll send them the questions in advance because I want them to know and also think about like the things that they might have gone through. But if I had a podcast, I probably wouldn't do that. I would just want to maybe talk to the person. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't think one way is bad or good. I don't.
Right.
I know I'm
Yeah.
contradicting what I just said, but
No,
I don't think one way is good or bad.
Yeah, I've kind of personally like tried a little bit of both. For me personally, I guess it's I'd like to have a welcoming kind of like free environment where they're just, they feel comfortable. So I guess and it's also selfishly for me, I always felt a little bit like stiff when I was reading off of, like, if I had a list, I'd be like, I found myself not paying attention to what you say, right? So I'd rather like maybe I have some themes and then I'm like, okay, then I listen to your answer and we go off the answer. Because I found myself being like, okay, Sam, what's your favorite video you made? And you're like, well, there's a lot of them, but I guess this one. Okay, great. And the least favorite? The least favorite? The worst one? And you're like, all right, what are we? Because
Always
I
my
would just
last
be
one
like
is
nervous myself, like, so
yeah.
instead I'm like,
You're
okay,
not in the moment,
right.
right? You're
Not
taking
listening
yourself.
back.
Yeah, I struggle with that as well. Like when I'm interviewing somebody like in person and I'm trying to tell their story, because I bet you probably found that you get some of the best answers when you're just naturally having a conversation with somebody rather than following this script.
Right.
But I also think you need to be prepared as well. Like
Sure.
for example, like, I'm sure you've done some homework on me and seen my work, and you said you watched the video before the show.
Yep.
So I think that's important to get that base understanding of who the person is that's going to be on your show, but
Sure.
then also keep it very loose so that you can find those magic moments when, that you wouldn't otherwise come across if you followed the script to a T.
Sure. Yeah, and to your point, on the new videos, obviously one of the big ones that kind of popped off recently was the Freedom video. That was one that I very rarely share stuff like on my personal account, and I was like, no, people need to see this, so I shared it, and then I'm like, all right, we got to dig into this. Like, who made this? This thing it's bigger than life. So I'd love to hear how that came about, and then again, your thoughts on, similar to the Reagan piece. Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the concepts that were discussed. And for people listening, the Freedom video, it's Joe Rogan talking about kind of the state of the world right now, and how the U.S. Is the lone society that's ever had kind of true freedom. It's been a lot of totalitarianism, authoritarian governments. And it just put things in perspective for me. And obviously it sounds like, obviously for you too.
Yeah, 100%. I think, I guess the biggest, I was starting to see the writing on the wall. So this dates back to, before I even came across that episode, that Joe Rogan episode where I decided to turn into the Freedom video. But I was starting to see the writing on the wall, and I live 20 minutes outside of New York City. So, what's on the news every day is the things that are going on, in New York City, since I'm so close. And I started to see the talks about the vaccine passports. Like, they were going to be implementing this. And I said, oh shit, like this resembles the beginning stages of what was going on, throughout history. And I said, wow, that's pretty crazy that we've gotten to that point. And I was driving back from a video shoot, I don't know, a couple of days later, and I was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast, and Rogan went on this like wild tangent, this wild rant about like, if we don't secure our freedom and protect it at all costs. And when he finished that rant, it made the hairs on my arm stand up. I'm like, he's fucking right. Like, so I remember going home, and I downloaded the show. I put it in my video editor, and I spent 48 hours like nonstop. I put client work on the side. I said, I felt so compelled to do something with that I said, I don't, I had like deadlines and stuff. I said, I made excuses. I said, guys, whatever. And I'm like, I got to get this thing out there. And and I just cranked away, and I put it together, and that was it, man. That was really the reason that I decided to, to do that. I just feel like, if we don't stand up for what we have, this, this rare thing called freedom, and we just let it get it stripped away from, taken away from us. Um, it's not just it's not just us that's going to be affected, but it's us and our future generations and their future generations, right?
Right.
It's like, I have to do this for my daughter, right? Because she can't go out there and protest. She can't go out there and fight. She's 5 years old, right? And I've got to fight for her and for her children and her children's children. So if we don't do something today, I think they're going to look back at us and say, why didn't they do something?
Right.
Because now they have to live in this world.
It's so strong. That just gave me chills. So it's a scary thing, but it's also something that, a video like that does give you hope, that, and the traction that it gets has to give you hope that, okay, there's a lot of us that feel the same way. I'm sure the effect of that video has obviously been huge, and it made me think of this quote when you were just talking, about basically stand up for your right. There's this quote that's like, the only necessary thing for evil to triumph is for good men to do absolutely nothing. So, because you kind of think that, oh, things will work out, like there's got to be people out there doing good and that are on our side, and it's like, at some point you gotta stand up for yourself and make an impact yourself. It's kind of going full circle from what we started to talk about at the beginning, but yeah, this is certainly a pivotal moment in time. So I'm glad that, I applaud you for what you're doing to help and getting the message out there. And it is scary. I think back to social studies, like in high school, and we talk about, like, we talk about Nazi Germany, we talk about like all of these different big atrocities that happened, and it'd be like, obviously all of us would stand up, and it's like, well, based on the numbers, no, maybe 2 out of the 20 or 1. But it's crazy when you, like, hindsight's 2020, all of us are looking at, it's like, we would have never allowed that to happen. And then you look at the things that are going on, and it's like, this is another one of those moments. Hopefully we can learn from history. And so anyways, I've gone down rabbit holes of getting super discouraged with, like, the state of the world. And then I've also recently, another book that I'm reading is called, like, America, the Last Best Hope. And it talks about, like, how, there's checks and balances built in there. Like, the forefathers knew we were going to fuck it up. Like, basically, like, the forefathers were like, all right, they're gonna get a little wild for a bit, like, this will reel them back. And that's kind of like how the pendulum swings. But there are certain things that, like, this is something I kind of never thought I would see, where it's going, like, even further than it has in the past. And you're like, okay, let's get back to the 1776. I think those boys were on something.
Yeah.
So,
I think the pendulum is beginning to swing the other way.
right.
I'm naturally, like, an optimistic person.
Mhm.
And when I created that freedom video, I really didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. If I'm
Yeah.
being honest with you, I just saw it getting worse. But now you're starting to see these forced mandates. You're starting to see, firefighters and policemen and people working in the hospitals, people that we looked at last year as heroes, and now they're sort of the enemy because they don't want to,
Right.
be forced mandated to get the vaccine. And I'm not anti-vax by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I feel that they're necessary, but I certainly think that there's an agenda with this particular, vaccine, and I'm not even sure why they're even calling it a vaccine, because I don't ever recall a time in my life where somebody got the smallpox vaccine and was able to still get it and give it to me. So it's like, whatever that, but that's my choice, right? It's
Right.
it's my freedom as, or, my right as an American to choose if I want to get that or not.
Right.
And, I forget where I was going with this, but,
No,
yeah, man,
it's
so I see the tides turning, you're seeing now, like the Biden administration was, um, they were putting a deadline on the mandates, and now you see it being halted by federal courts. And it's like, okay, oh, like maybe
yeah,
there is some hope. So, I think that pendulum is swinging back the other way. What was the one airline? Was it
yeah,
Southwest
so,
Airlines? They,
yeah, they're,
right? Didn't American Airlines also, do something as well, like the employees? I
I'm
could
not
be wrong, but
I'm not sure, but I do know the Southwest had like the "Don't Tread on Me" flags, which was kind of a nice touch.
yeah, yeah. And then one of them, like the pilot was also saying, like, "Go Brandon" on the, on
Yeah.
the, so right. And then here, and that's the other thing. Like every stadium has like people chanting, "Let's go Brandon." It's like, okay, so we're not alone, right? This
Yeah.
kind of like what I was saying before about when I was going through my own adversity, and I felt like I was going alone. If anybody, if you don't see, like, I think that there's truly an awakening happening right now where we're all coming together and starting to see the curtain be pulled back, and we're starting to see, like, these fuckers are really trying to do everything they
Yeah.
can in their power to take what we have away.
And that's some of the benefit of digital media. Like obviously I'm in the digital media space, so I always like vouch for it. There's pros and cons like anything. So, in digital media, one of the cons is like there's a lot of polarization, there's a lot of echo chambers. So once the algorithm knows what you like and don't like, it's gonna like force feed you everything. But to your point about the kind of like unveiling like what's behind the curtain, the transparency kind of effect, I think that component of digital media has been huge. Like people aren't getting away with the shit they used to, like, there. And it's also from a personal perspective, you're able to see, okay, these people around the world also believe, they're on the same page. So I know for me, living in Massachusetts, it's like sometimes you feel like you're a lone wolf out here. Like like you're crazy if you just are like walking around without a mask on or something. And it's like, what, like, I had times like that when I was like middle of the summer walking down the street, and like everywhere I looked, it's just like people masked up giving you dirty looks. And I'm like, am I the crazy one, or like what's happening? But obviously because politics got involved, it became more about like virtue signaling and political signaling of like, this is who I ride with. And I've never been like a political person. I'm registered independent. I just like kind of have always thought for myself. I, think I'm pretty like socially liberal, fiscally to the right, which tends to be a lot of my generation, my friends. But even saying that around here, it's like, what? Fiscally to the right? Like, how dare you? How dare you?
Yeah.
So
That's funny because I've always never really been into politics, like, at all. Like
yeah,
I stayed away the hell away from them.
yeah,
And more recently I feel like I'm being pulled in, right? Like
right.
with the content that that I'm now putting out there. So
Yeah.
I think you have to be, right. There's always, if you follow the trend, if you follow what everybody else is doing, that doesn't necessarily make it right. Like there's
Right,
a lot of people out there that have shitty diets. Should you follow that?
right,
I don't know. No, probably
right.
not. Right.
Yeah,
So, uh, if you look back at history, it was always it was usually like one or two people that stood out, that fought against what
mhm,
everybody else was doing. Right. Like you look at, the civil rights era, Rosa Parks decided to, like, I'm not sitting in the back of the bus. Right. When you stand up against what everybody thinks is right, is when you make the difference. And
right.
we all collectively, I think, have the power to do that, to make a difference.
I'm gonna clip that soundbite for sure for the promo, because that, I mean, you're dropping a lot of wisdom.
Oh,
But yeah,
hopefully
we
no bonehead stuff, man. I feel like anytime I talk, I'm a bonehead.
no. Uh, and yeah, again, to your point, about standing out and fighting against kind of like things that we know to be wrong. I was always taught against growing up, like we were taught against groupthink, like, okay, even in a group of like 5 people, 10 people, there's this like notion of you don't want to kind of ruffle any feathers or whatever. And then subsequently you realize out of the 10 people, maybe 8 of them would have been on your side if you had stood up. So there's that effect that if once you do have someone stand up, they did this psychological study of at like this big concert, and like kind of no one was dancing, and the one person goes out and starts to dance, and then once the second one comes, then within like 20 seconds there's like 80 people. But it takes the two, the first two, and then it's like everybody starts chiming in like, oh yeah, I feel the same way. But
Yeah.
it's so that's a strong I forget the name of the experiment, but I've always thought that that's pretty interesting, because you'll see it. I see it around here too. Like you see someone, not to keep bringing up like the mask thing, but that's just a current topic. And you see someone like without it, and then like 5 more people will take it off. Like, yeah, I think this thing's stupid too. It's like, okay, so there's more people. And my whole thing has always been like, it's not so much like a signaling thing. It's literally like, I always look at things from like a critical thinking, like objective standpoint. I'm like, does this make sense? If it makes sense, if the rule makes sense, like I'll follow the rule. Like red light, yeah, I'm gonna stop at the red light. Like, is it doing harm to other people? Like, I will absolutely not do it. Does it make conceptual sense? But then there's rules where it's like, okay, you test negative for the disease that everyone's worried about, and you go into this venue, but yet you still have to wear a mask. But I thought I just tested that I don't have the disease. So like, I can't spread it because I don't have it. So what am I doing?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. And you see so many examples of that.
Like, okay.
Yeah. But right, and I get that, but then you also see, our the people that are the leaders, right? They're the governors, and they're the presidents, and they're vice presidents, and then it's like, they're telling you should all be wearing a mask, and then they show up, at an event with a mask on, and then as soon as they're around people, they pull it off, or they get in front of the media and they put it back on. It's like, you're contradicting your own your own statements by, it's through your actions.
Sure. Yeah.
And also what you were saying before is that, like, not doing something, like, I truly believe that we can, in any situation, you could always make matters worse. Right. And going back to this whole, like, fighting for your rights, right? By not doing something, you can make the matters worse. Right. Mm-hmm. You can let the other side gain power, gain momentum, and continue to extract and take away your freedoms. And before you know it, like, one of the things when I made that freedom video, it's like I watched probably a ton of documentaries, because like we were talking about before, I'm very selective about the visuals that I put in there, and I want to make sure that when somebody's watching my video, it's accurate. And one of the documentaries that I watched was about this woman that spoke about Nazi Germany. And she had said that their freedoms weren't taken, like they weren't just like put onto a train and sent to a camp like overnight. Their freedoms were taken away little by little by little. And it's like the little things, like, okay, well, that's not a big deal. Okay, that's not a big deal either. And you become conditioned to thinking that this new norm is the normal. And by not doing something, not fighting against that, right, you make the matters worse.
Absolutely. Right? That's a great point. Yeah, it's like give an inch, they take a mile type of philosophy almost.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And you see that happen in Australia pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Where it's like, yeah, I have some people, peers over there that are like, whoa, this like you said, it started as like, okay, we just need to do this and this. Everybody's on board. Okay, now we're also gonna do this, and pretty soon you're like, whoa, what's going on here? But to your point about kind of like the awakening and people kind of like rising up, you're seeing it all over now. So I think, overwhelmingly, I am positive too that the gig is up kind of thing. Like it's
Me
it's
too.
just a matter of time where and you see also naturally to the point about the book that I was referencing, like you almost sometimes you have to let like those socialist policy like crumble on themselves so people can see just how bad it is. And that's like the point of the book. It's like, okay, let's see what happens when we go with your direction. And then people start like, oh, okay. So anyways,
Super dangerous. Yeah.
So to get back to the film side of things, again, we're on 1,000 different, the show notes are going to be like from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, vaccine mandates, 10 minutes to 12, like, all this
Back to vaccine mandates.
yeah. But yeah, back to film. So you mentioned a lot of like we talked a little bit about the montage videos that you've done, but you also talked about how you have the original content that you were doing in the past with folks at like the jiu-jitsu gym. What are some other projects that you've worked on that you're really proud of?
I've done some short films like a couple years ago. It's a little dated now, but it was in that whole jiu-jitsu space where for me, jiu-jitsu's changed, it's changed my life, right? Significantly. Like it's taught me a lot about myself. And I think there's a lot of lessons that you can learn on the mats. I don't know if you train yourself or not, but
Not jiu-jitsu, no, not personally.
okay. And I mean, there's other sports that can, I'm not saying that like, jiu-jitsu is like the holy grail of all sports.
Yep.
There's a lot of lessons to be learned from boxing and other, other sports. But anyway, because jiu-jitsu for me had such a big impact, and I've seen the changes that it's made in so many people's lives just because it's such a small world. Everybody sort of knows each other. I decided to do this film a while back where it was basically about a man that was struggling through life. There was no dialogue. It was a man struggling through life, and he had a drinking habit, and he's down in the dumps, literally in front of a dumpster, and somebody walks up to him and decides to throw him a gi, right? A gi is a jiu-jitsu uniform, and basically inviting him to start training. And in that process of training, and he discovers that he can become a better person, or he has a capability of being a better person, and he decides to stop the drinking. You see visuals of him like dumping his alcohol, and ultimately it changes his life. And then the video cuts to somebody else going through that same process, and he walks up to that person at that same dumpster with a gi and decides to give it to him, and the cycle continues. So that was probably my proudest one, because it was just like, I remember I was at my job and I was just like, I like to do a video, and this just idea kind of came to me, and I said, man, that'd be so cool to do. And I just, it was probably my proudest piece. Again, it's a little dated now. I look back at it and I'm like, man, I could have done this better, but the overall story and the message was great. And I think that's probably my proudest piece, because it's so different than from the other things I've done.
Absolutely. I love the like full circle nature of it, of giving it back and like passing on. That's great. And to your point, there's always going to be new, I think artists specifically, or creatives, or really anybody that's curious and trying to get better every day, like you said, when you look back at your old work, it's like sometimes you want to like cringe. I know I do the same thing, because it's like, oh, I would have done this, I would have used this instead, like these effects, blah blah blah. But the strongest like at the core is the message. So as long as that gets across, like you'll always be proud of it. I'll have to check that one out.
It's called Brave New World. If you want, if you want to go check it out.
Another good book too.
Yeah. I never read the book. I read like you know, the bio on it, but yeah, and that piece, like I said, you know, was probably one of my proudest. It did really well for in the community. I ended up getting like, I think on Facebook, I ended up getting like maybe 35, 40,000 views. And at the time I wasn't really like accustomed to getting those kind of, you know, those kind of
Yeah,
views.
that's huge.
So yeah. And it was nice because it was like, it wasn't on anybody that had fame. It was just like a nobody knew the characters in the story. They were just like other jiu-jitsu guys that were willing to be part of it from another school that I didn't even belong to. And they were willing to help me out, and they were awesome. You know, and more than willing to be part of it. So
That's great. You mentioned you were at your job when you were working on that. I'm interested to hear what your 9 to 5 job was, and then how you like transitioned out of that.
so the transition wasn't overnight. It was a long process of trying to build up clients, get my filmmaking better. So my job was I was working for a large corporation. I mean, this, you know, a global corporation, and I was in their logistics department. I handled exporting and importing containers of hazardous materials. And so, you know, I landed that career when I was 20 years old, and it, you know, paid the bills, but it was really it wasn't anything I was passionate about. And I found that as I discovered this love for filmmaking, I kind of just fell into it. It made me like resent my 9 to 5, like
Hmm.
day by day. It got to a point where I was sitting in this cubicle, and I remember feeling like I would like, it's weird to say now, but like I would get like these itches in my body, and like, I can't sit here. Like I can't, like I wanted to just, you know, just walk out the door, because I knew that there was something much bigger for me. Um, but obviously I had to sit there because I had bills to pay, right? I have a house, I have a mortgage, and I've got a, you know, I've got a kid. And but I knew that if I just kept on pushing forward and just creating content, I didn't know how it was going to happen. But little by little, as I created more content, my brand got more and more awareness, and people started to reach out to me that I didn't know. It wasn't through like word of mouth. It was people that came across my content, like, man, I really want that for my business, and that's how I started to build a client base. And then at the end of June 2020, um, uh, my job was really affected by COVID. Their main bread and butter, one of their largest customers was Boeing.
Hmm.
And Boeing, if anybody remembers, their one of their planes kept on crashing. Do you remember that whole
Yeah.
situation? Like, I think it was a 727.
Yeah.
Kept on crashing, and that affected our business significantly. But we were able to, you know, still carry on, because the company had a bunch of other customers. But when COVID hit, it really crippled the business, right? Because now all planes are landed, nobody's traveling. The world is sort of stopped. And at the end of June 2020, my company, my job let me go, right? And I said, "Fuck, what am I gonna do?" Like, I had a couple clients, whatever, but it wasn't like enough to, you know, to make the jump. And it was almost as if the world said, like, this is, remember I said at the beginning of the show, like, life happens for you, not to you.
Right.
Almost within a couple weeks, I started to get all these client calls, like, "Hey, we saw your work, we would love to work with you." And I started to very quickly build up a client base.
Wow.
And it was, you know, it was like literally the world saying, like, "Hey, Sam, if you don't stop doing this job, right, we're gonna have to force you out."
I was
And in
gonna
order,
say, it forced your hand a little bit, right?
it did, it really did. And looking back, at the time I was scared. I'm like, I was talking to my wife, I'm like, "What are we gonna do?" And she's like, "We'll be fine," or whatever. um and I've been blessed, man. Like, I ended up getting calls enough to, you know, it was still a salary cut, but it was enough to get us by. And that's kind of, you know, where it started. And you know, now 2021 is almost over, and it's been the best year for me career wise.
Congrats.
So
That is awesome. That is so great.
yeah.
And it's it's interesting. I feel like creating, compelling content like you do is one of the best ways for as far as like a prospecting tool. You always think of like, at least I did when I was getting into the business world, it's like you got to send X number of emails, make all these cold calls, and there's something to that, but really focusing on the actual product, making the product good, and in your case, making the content really engaging. It's like that's going to lead to that word of mouth. And there's nothing better than having a referral of like, someone telling their best friend, hey, this is the guy you need. Like this, look at what he did for me.
Yeah.
Because sometimes
Yeah,
you
100%. I think you're right, man. Like a lot of times people will focus on like, oh, let me work on my reel, let me showcase my product. But I found that, at least in my experience, if you give people a reason to care, they're going to want to share. And in that sharing your content, you open up yourself, you open up a whole world of new possibilities. You give you get the exposure that you want. So you've got to invest in yourself. So it doesn't matter if like, if you're selling iced tea or whatever, like provide value to the people that are tuning into your stuff and giving and following you. A lot of times, and I've in sometimes some of my clients don't listen to me or take my advice. I should say, nobody should listen to me, but take my advice just from my own experience. Like they try to make it about them, right? Let me show them how great I am, and nobody gives a fuck, right? For the most part. That's why you don't really see any content of me out there. I always find it interesting that people want to like, interview me or get me on a podcast. It's like, I think I'm like probably the most boring person in the world. Like I'm just sitting behind a desk, like clicking away, making videos. I'm not doing anything like, I don't know. I don't think I'm doing anything all that special. If I'm being honest with you, it's like, I'm just making something and it comes out awesome and great. I don't think it's like, I don't know. Maybe that's just my humble side talking.
Yeah, we beg to differ over here, but no, I think you're having certainly a tangible impact, not only on the people that you're providing the films for, but a wide variety of folks that need to hear these messages. So I think it is having absolutely an impact, and it's kind of it's like a spark, right? Like you spark all of these different inspirations that come off of it, like a web. Like, okay, now this person's inspired, and makes them want to, maybe it's not create a video, but it's write a poem or a song about whatever they were inspired by. Or it doesn't necessarily need to be these exact same genre, but I think being like a creative person myself, when I get inspired by a certain it could be anything, but it's interesting of like how big of an impact one specific video or song can have. So
it's a ripple effect for sure.
Yeah. Are there any specific resource, or not resources, like catalysts, I guess, muses for your inspiration? Like, do you have certain people you always listen to and you find that it spurs that kind of reaction for you? Or like, who's someone out there that's inspiring you right now?
It depends on what area it is, right?
Sure.
So if it comes down to personal development, right, it would be a guy like Ryan Holiday and some of his books, a guy about overall about just how to live your life and just like gain, just absorbing knowledge and learning from others is certainly going to be Rogan. There's a whole bunch of people that there's not just like any one person, but I'm always on a hunt for finding the person that's going to, I can extract value from. So like, I don't know, it could be discovering a new book or discovering somebody, somebody's inspiring words. Like, I think we, there's a story and a lesson that we can get from anybody. It doesn't have to be like this influencer. It could be, it could be your parents, it could be a friend. I think there's, a lot to be learned from from everybody that you come across. So
Absolutely.
hopefully it answers your question.
Absolutely. Everybody's got a story to tell, right? That's
absolutely.
I've-
I do want to say, like, the first Rogan video, I don't know how far back you went with my content, but the first Rogan video that I did was a video called Growth. And I remember working on that video. I was this was still working my 9 to 5, and I was working on that video at 4:30 a.m. on my lunch break, and then at night when I would get home. And the one thing that he said in that video was, if you have an idea, and you work to, basically the paraphrasing here, but he goes, if you have an idea and you work towards it, you can do something with that. Like, life gives you that opportunity to do something with what you love. And I was listening to YouTube just about a month ago. I was driving to a client, and my video ended up auto playing, and ironically was that growth video. And now I'm not working any longer my 9 to 5. I'm driving to probably one of my biggest jobs to date. And I hear Rogan saying that, and I remember listening to it, and I'm like, it made me cry in the car, like, because that was like the first, really, remember how we were talking about like enjoying the journey, and like, looking back, like those grinding, in between hours, like those were like some of the best times as well. Like, shit, man, like you hated your job so much and you finally figured it out. But I was driving, I had to like pull over. I'm like, I just started bawling. I'm like, man, like you actually like listening back to that first video, and now here it is 5 years later. I'm like, man, you actually fucking figured it out. And it just, I guess there's really no point to what I was trying to get at, other than listen to that video and listen to what Rogan's saying. Like, and if you're out there, you have some ideas, you have some goals, listen, you can completely change your life if you just keep on working at it. It's just one step at a time.
Amen. Absolutely. I'm going to go watch that video now. I did see a handful of them. I think the farthest back I went was the happiness one, like life with happiness. I'm just looking through but I did not see this. I'm looking simulation, growth, and balance. Yeah, it's the first one.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. And it was such a blessing, because like Rogan's been great to me, man. Like I created that video, and I remember after I published it was like a Sunday night, because I remember I was driving the next day to like I had to go to like a logistics training at a hotel. And I was in that meeting, and like I started like getting all these buzzes on my phone, like all these notifications, and it was and comments on the video. Like my phone just kept going bzz, 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 bzz. And I remember like Joe sent me here, awesome video. I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And then maybe about 30 minutes after that, I get this DM that says, hey man, I love your video, and it's by no other than Joe Rogan.
Wow, that's amazing.
I'm like, oh my God, like how I never thought in a million years. I'm like, this has got to be a joke. It's got to be one of my buddies, like, fucking with me. Yeah. And I looked at the account, it was verified. It was actually on Twitter. And I'm like, holy shit, it's fucking Joe Rogan. Like,
that's great.
And
that's so cool.
Yeah. So it was kind of like reward. Like he's been great to me. Like he's pretty much shared every single one of my Rogan videos that I've made. Yeah. And it's helped my business 100%. It's helped my brand. Yeah, that was kind of like the first like little sign, like, hey, you're on the right path. You got this guy that you've sort of looked up to for so many years, and here he is, he's sharing your content.
Yeah, that must have felt amazing. That's just like such a validating moment. And and that's a great thing too, again, with digital. It's like I always tell people, like, a lot of times these are just the people behind their accounts. Like they're pretty accessible if you're, if you have a good product like yourself, or you're just coming from like a genuine place. Like if you're truly genuine, that always shines through. People can tell. If you're coming off like gimmicky and salesy, like we're talking about, like, you're sending these massive spam emails to like people, you're going to get deleted. But if you're truly trying to offer some sort of value, and you truly care about you know, what the person's doing. It's like you can get in touch with a lot of pretty interesting people nowadays, whereas in the
Yeah, no,
past it's like pretty difficult.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think that's the biggest lesson for anybody that's you know, if you're out there creating content, or you have a business, like put the people following you first. Like at the end of the day, like I understand you have a business and you got to make money, especially like if you're in a product business where you're selling t-shirts or whatever it may be. You've got to promote your product. But if you have the ability to provide value without necessarily selling something, people are much more attracted to that. I found that, you know, if you look at really any of my videos, I'm not selling anything. I'm not, you know, you don't get to the end of the video and it's not like, it's not me sitting there like, hey, buy my t-shirt, like, or
Right.
it's got my website. And if you want to go visit it, great, cool. Hit me up if you want a video, but I'm not directly selling you anything. I put the people that follow me first, period.
Absolutely. That's a good lesson. Speaking of t-shirts, I love that long sleeve, the training. That's a pretty
Oh,
sweet. Is
thanks.
that where you train?
It's no, this is a buddy of mine. He's actually a chief of police here at in a local town, and he's got an organization that helps police officers train with striking and or I shouldn't, let me take that back, not necessarily striking, but like how to safely take somebody down. Because if you remember a couple of years ago, there was like issues with people getting strangled, and it's about using force without using force, and it's a whole program built around that. So yeah, so this is my
Put out the
shirt.
Guardian training. Absolutely.
Yeah, man. Yeah, they've got a good program. There's one UFC fighter that's part of that program, Jimmy Rivera. Yeah, so check them out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. I know it went a million different directions. I think that's the beauty of it. So thanks for you know, being willing to kind of jump into a lot of different topics. Very, very interesting to get the chance to talk with you, and I know I learned a lot.
Well, I appreciate that. And listen, man, I had a blast. It was a lot of fun. And you know, if you ever want to have me back on the show, I'd love to be back on.
I was gonna say we'll have to do it again soon because you know there's another million topics we could get into. So I definitely will reach out again. Thank you so much. Well, have a good rest of the day, and we'll be in touch.
All right, Bradley. Talk to you soon, man.
Have a good one.
See ya.